So I've just been thinking about the translations of the Bible and the Vedas and the differences between the way the words are translated and the way that I would probably have translated them, that I think have created some really serious issues within Hinduism and Christianity about the interpretations of these books, and specifically the way the religions are practiced. And so I'm thinking about why I wouldn't translate them, why I wouldn't go to the trouble of trying to translate them. And I wanted to share that. I don't think that I could be necessarily qualified to translate them. And even if I knew Sanskrit really well, or even if I knew Hebrew or Greek really well, and I wanted to translate those texts, I might be confident with a passage or two, but I think to translate the whole thing, I think it would be a mistake. And I've seen several translations of the Vedas, and I'm only really familiar with the King James Version of the Bible and only little pieces of it. But the things that are in contention, the things that seem to be contradictory to reality, that seem to cause so much strife and trouble, I think are the result of bad translation. And when I look at what I've done with my poetry, and I look at the way that some people are probably going to interpret things to think that a particular thing is about them, with Space Cadet Love, they don't understand that there's a multiple dimensional approach to those types of arts and poetries and stuff like that. And to even try to translate it to another language with a different logos, different forms, where those types of insights, those types of mappings to the meanings are so incredibly different. To try to keep up with something like an entendre or a multiple meaning within a singular textual translation, it's going to be impossible. It's not going to be possible to do that. And so if a text is really a sacred text, if a text is really that important, I would say to translate it and call the book the same book is a mistake. Aurobindo was one of the greatest Sanskrit-speaking, English-speaking scholars in recent history. And he's not really even that recent comparatively to the technological age. He wrote many books, but he didn't translate the Vedas. You have to ask, why did this brilliant man, why did this exceptional poet not want to translate these sacred texts? Aurobindo knew that it would be a disservice for him to translate these texts into English, into another language, and represent them, falsely represent them as the Vedas. Space Cadet Love. No, you'll see me never miss a line, fall in love with a song now. And so it's almost a disservice. And I know if I was the author of one of these texts and someone tried to translate it into another language and then call it the thing that I had called it and try to represent it to this separate culture, maybe in a separate time, thousands of years away, and call it the same thing, I would be furious. The wrath of God notwithstanding. I think it's important that we read and study these texts. I think it's important that we try to understand what we have from these time spaces that are so far separated from our own. But to base these lofty conclusions on these mistranslations, oh, this is terrible, terrible thinking. And to imagine that the kinds of things that are done by these religious nuts in the name of the word that comes out of these books is absolutely ridiculous. And I don't think it's any sort of conspiracy that these books are free. I don't think it's any sort of conspiracy that the Bible is so prevalent in our culture. I think it's a very, very important book. And I think it needs to be read. But I think it needs to be read in the context of where and when it came from. It needs to be read intelligently. If you look at what Sri Aurobindo says about the Vedas in his book, The Secret of the Vedas, I think you'll discover that what is translated as this sort of Christ light that is in the Vedas understood to be the influence of Surya, that soma that comes from the sacred cow is that solar influence. And this is mistranslated in almost every Hindu religion sect that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of a Vedic or Hindu sect that I believe has the proper translation of this, just like the Christ in the Bible. They don't understand what that is in the context of whence it came. And it's important. It is very, very important. And I think it's the place in the Bible where, you know, Moses talks about the people when he comes down from Mount Sinai worshiping this idol, this false idol, this cow, you know, rather than knowing the truth about the nature of that leads him to say that God told him to kill all the people that have it wrong. And I think that's incredibly radical. I think it's probably not a good idea. But at the same time, it's also, ironically, the source of this sort of fundamentalist, radical, extremist activity that we see in these organized religions that have taken the context of these texts outside of what should be the light